Incognito is a mystery game in which players go behind bars to find who done it in the case of a recently murdered gang member. Like all of the reviews I post, they're unbiased and unpaid. I have no affiliation with this company. This game is recommended for 1 to 6 players. 6 might be a little bit too many. You might find you're not really being able to participate as much with that many. I'd recommend a smaller group, or as I did, you can play it solo. The playtime is about 2 to 4 hours in length. It depends on how much effort you're going to put into researching things online and how long it will take you to solve the puzzles. That's why there's such a gap in time. And especially if you have a group, there's certain stages that will take you a lot longer to go through than a solo player would. The replayability value is fairly minimal. Once you get to the end of this case, you'll have solved the murder and you won't really need to play the game from scratch. As this game involves making some choices at different stages, you're probably going to be interested in checking out what would have happened had you made those different choices. For me, that is more of a kind of like the old DVD extras thing where you watch the deleted scenes and so on. So this game combines some different elements that you might have encountered in other types of games. There are puzzle elements that you might have experienced if you've played escape room games. There's a choose your own adventure element, and I use the word choose a little bit loosely. It's more like influence your own adventure. And there's also an investigative game element. Compared to other investigative games, the way this game plays out, it almost feels like it's inverted. And what I mean by that is, in a game like Unsolved Case Files, you're going to have access to the backgrounds of the suspects fairly early on in the game, and you can have a clear sense of what had happened in the past. Whereas in Incognito, you tend to get a lot of the background information towards the end of the game. And during this game, you're sort of picking up little fragments of information here and there. One of the things I like about it is because it's set in a prison. Of course, prisons are notorious for their secrecy. Of course, loose lips sink ships, or loose lips get shanked, something like that. So the characters you meet in the game are not really spilling much useful information. There's a few things that come up here and there people might mention to you, but they're not that critical to the case itself, but they can be involved in helping you unlock some information. In most of this game, your character is going around and trying to steal pieces of information, taking something off the wall, taking something off somebody's desk, taking something out of the trash can in a guard's room and things like that. The game comes with a thick stack of cards. You're not going to be reading all of these cards in the game because of the choice system. You will be told to throw away cards at certain times. There are also a number of envelopes which you'll be told to access at different stages of the game. This is the very first one you'll be receiving during the game, and it'll look something like this. As this is a mystery game, I'm somewhat limited in the amount of material I'm going to show you because I don't want to spoil things for you. So consider yourself warned that the next section will have some minimal spoilers. I'm just going to be showing you some of the game location cards and some of the suspects. Here is a look at the game. Over on the left, you'll see a symbol reference. It just shows you what to do when you see certain symbols on the cards. Maybe you have to throw a card away. Maybe you have to pull out another card. Maybe you have to visit a website or open an envelope. You keep the draw stack on the left, and once you've gotten through all the cards, you can then progress to the finale. It'll tell you to check your answer on the website first. And here are the locations you'll see in the game. Only one of them is set outside of the prison. You've got the FBI, the warden's office, and you've got the type of places you might expect to be visiting if you were in prison, the type of places you expect to see if you watch a prison movie. You've got places like the cell, the infirmary, the basketball court, the rec room, the library, the laundry room, visiting room, guard room, and commissary. And you've also got space on this sheet to keep track of your suspects. On the top right, we actually have the victims. So in this game, you're given 7 suspects to look into. There are also areas to write your notes. You might notice that the prisoners themselves, in most instances, are just referred to by their official tracking number, and you can add their name as you come across things into the later stages of the game. So far I've completed Incognito and 2 other games in this Masters of Crime series, Shadows, which is set in the art world, and Vendetta, which is set in the mafia world. And I have played the game in the style I've just shown you, where I keep the cards on the board. I have ordered the other game in the series, and I'm going to try and play it in a slightly different way. What I'm going to be doing the next time I play it is I'm going to take the cards for the first location, and I'm going to keep those cards with the envelope that it's connected to. One thing I've found that uses up quite a bit of time while playing this game is checking through different documents because of the way they're presented, in that they're folded up and you have to open them up to see what's on them. It does take a lot of extra time to figure out where the one you're thinking of checking actually is. I think if I keep them with the location cards, the next time I play them, I'm going to be able to access them more quickly. I'll let you know how it goes in the next video. In the game, you're going to have different locations. This is location A. This is the FBI office, where you're going to get some instructions before you head into the prison. And here is how the game itself functions. So you have the card. You should always take care and look at any details that might be useful to you in the picture. There can be hints on some of the picture cards. And then you flip it over and you have a lot of text, and then you'll usually have some options. So I'm not going to read through the text, but I am going to give you a look at the first set of options you have at the start of the game. The options in this game tended to fall into one of 2 types. There were either options where it was somewhat unclear what the correct path would be, and there were other options on other cards where it was quite obvious which one you should be choosing based on information you'd seen earlier in the game or basic psychology. Here are the first 3 options you'll be faced with at the beginning of the game. You can browse the FBI database, brush up on self-defense, or get a temporary teardrop tattoo under your eye. I didn't really understand the temporary teardrop tattoo part. The game does have this web symbol, which is used whenever it recommends that you Google something to find out more about it. I do like that aspect of the game, so I could quickly learn what it means to have a temporary teardrop tattoo and why it might be useful if you're in prison. It seems like each of those 3 choices are positive and would be useful for you. And during the game, there's no real way of knowing, unless you cheat, which choice is actually the better for you. At certain stages in this game, you will need to go onto the internet to enter the solution to puzzles that you come across in the game. You may also be visiting some of the game's websites. There are specific websites relating to the prison within this game, and you can do certain things on there. I won't tell you what because they are spoilers, but I think this was used quite well. It did raise the difficulty of a somewhat straightforward crime case. The makers of this game have structured in a way that no matter which choice you make, by the time you get to the end of the game, you're always going to have enough information for you to decide who is the murderer in this case. You're always going to be able to rule out people. You're always going to be able to provide alibis. So your choices don't actually influence your final outcome very much in this game. What it does influence in this case, in this particular game, is certain types of information are contained on the cards that are not there on other cards. So after I finished this game, one of the things I felt was I didn't really have much knowledge of the victim himself. He didn't really seem very human to me. And then when I looked at some of the cards that I hadn't selected during the game, the victim was more humanized. I also felt the choices that I made meant that I had less information about the gang that this game is focused on. I do wish there was some kind of mode within this game where a certain choice could lead to an unhappy ending, like maybe you get shanked or something like that. I'm really looking forward to playing more games in this genre where their choices are going to be more consequential, because the designers want you to be able to solve this murder no matter how you play the game. Your agency as a player is very restricted, so you're never told, do you want to take this item off the desk? You just read on the card, okay, you noticed while she was shuffling some papers that there were some things on her desk and you pocketed them, or somebody went out of the room, so you decided it was time to break into her locker. Let's see if you can solve this puzzle to work out what the PIN code for her locker is. There are a few cases where you do solve some problems as there are puzzles, but most of the game is just you're reading what your character did. I mentioned earlier that this game is rated as 16 plus. It's quite a high rating considering the content of the game. There's no violent imagery here. They have tilted reality somewhat in that if you know much about the American prison system, you know that there are a lot of gangs, and the gangs are typically gangs that are segregated by race. There are Hispanic gangs, black gangs, and white supremacist gangs. That's my understanding of how the gang structure of the American prison system works. In this gang that the game is focused on, there is no racial structure whatsoever. The leader is Asian, there's Latino guys, the gang had white members. Some other things you might expect to be involved in this type of prison story. If you've ever watched Oz, one of the major factors in that series was sexual abuse in prisons. There's nothing like that in this game. I think if you're looking for extreme content and you're hoping to find it in this game, you're going to be disappointed. I don't even think they have drug references in this game. The only drug from memory in this game is that there are cigarettes. If you are looking for a game that has more extreme content that's set in a prison, one you might be interested in checking out is the other game in the Guilty series. There is a game in the Guilty series called Houston 2015. It's set in a women's prison. I believe that is much more violent and it does contain sexual content. I think the main reason for that is one being set in a women's prison. People are maybe more accepting of that kind of content in terms of women than they are when it's presented with men. Men in particular are a little bit squeamish. So why is this game rated for 16 plus? At the very end of the game, you're presented with a kind of a surprising choice. What I really like about Incognito and also Vendetta is that at the end of the game, you get to make some choices about the fate of the other suspects in the case. You've obviously had some interaction and learned some things about them, and you get this option where you play God. And I think that's why this game is kind of rated for 16 plus, because you're making some quite serious choices about these characters right at the end. That aspect of the game is one that's really going to be most enjoyable if you have a group of people to talk with or just one other person. You might actually find in a big group there might be a bit of groupthink and people are not really going to say what they want to say, whereas if it's the two of you, they might reveal their secrets. People often say that investigative games are really good date games. I feel like this aspect of the game in Incognito and Vendetta, while it would be a really good experience to play with a partner and discuss these themes, because you're going to have such interesting conversations, you're going to learn so much about the person, it might actually be a relationship ender. You might find yourself disgusted by this person's view on the world and the type of choices that they would do given the power that you think, I don't really want to be involved with this person anymore. As I've mentioned before about the structure of the gang within this game, it doesn't really seem very realistic. There's one piece of evidence which it seems to be very unrealistic that this piece of evidence would still be in plain sight the day after the murder took place. While it is possible that it may have existed in the first place, it's really strange that you just found this piece of evidence on a wall. You would have thought it would have been torn down and ripped into pieces, and maybe you would have had to put the pieces back together because they are so incriminating. This game does include puzzles, and this is actually where I would have my strongest criticism of the game. In general, the puzzles here themselves are fine. It's the actual hint system the game is using that is the weak point. There was one puzzle where I couldn't work it out, so I went to the hint section, and instead of having a series of hints that gradually push you closer to the answer, and instead of even showing the working of how it works out, the hints don't go any further than saying use this sheet and use the website. So after that, I just had to jump to the solution, and oftentimes you can figure out how things work by seeing the solution, just reverse engineering the answer from the material you have. This wasn't one of those cases, so I'm actually going to have to wait for a channel like Co-op for Two to do a live stream playthrough of this so I can actually work out how this puzzle should be solved. And I don't think most people will have that problem. Just from looking at the reviews I've seen on Board Game Geek and Amazon, people haven't said that the puzzles were particularly difficult. I've only seen one other person comment and have the same problem that I did, so I guess I'm a bit of a dummy. Here are some more examples of the game's artwork. The artwork is somewhat basic, kind of what you would expect to see in a US prison. One issue I have with the artwork is it sometimes didn't seem to match. For example, this picture of the cafeteria, you get the description: as you enter the large, low-ceiling dining room, all faces turn to look at you. Only one table of inmates clustered around a heavily tattooed man with shoulder-length hair and a goatee seems to be enjoying themselves too raucously to pay you any attention. Now that really doesn't seem to match what is going on in the card here. The first half of this game does feel a lot more like the prison experience rather than the mystery experience, in that the fragments of information you're picking up aren't really something that you can begin to put together until you pool more information, which you'll get from the middle and the second half of the game. The game does include some descriptions of violence. It's nothing out of the ordinary for a game in this genre to have a description of somebody being beaten up. It's not especially graphic or anything like that. The way the game plays out, as you progress through the game, you're not given as many choices at different locations. At the later locations, you tend to be given more puzzles. I think from my perspective, I'm more interested in the choice aspect of these games than the puzzles. So that was a little bit disappointing for me, is in that in the first playthrough I got through most of the choices. And then the next time when I put the game out on the table and tried to finish it off, instead of having many choices, I had a lot of puzzles to deal with. If you're more interested in the escape room element of these games and solving those puzzles, you're probably going to enjoy that you've got lots of puzzles to work on in the latter half of the game, and you might find that the first half of the game is a bit of a drag. Within popular culture, there are a lot of prison-based stories. Probably the most famous would be the film The Shawshank Redemption. As a child, that was one of my favorites. I watched it again during lockdown, and I was quite pleased that I was still so emotionally moved by the main character. I always thought I was maybe a little bit too jaded to rewatch The Shawshank Redemption. Some other prison books and films that I would recommend are The Animal Factory. I think that was written by Edward Bunker. I haven't seen the film version. Another book that you might find really interesting if you're a gaming fan is a book called Games Prisoners Play. This is a book by a Polish sociologist who spent some time in prison, and he describes the prison culture through the perspective of game theory. This includes the types of choices that you have to make when trying to be initiated into gangs. One of the key details of these choices is you would be given an easy choice and a difficult choice. And it was basically used to filter out kind of dummies from people that were intelligent, in that if you chose the easy choice, you were a rube. If you chose the difficult choice, you were doing it knowing that nothing is really as difficult as it may seem. An example would be, there would be a stage of the initiation where you either have to put on a blindfold, stand on top of your bunk bed, and then jump to the floor. The other choice would be you have to put on a blindfold and the person would hold out some matches in front of you, and you had to try to bite one of the matches and take it from the person's hand. Now, a dummy would choose to put on the blindfold and take it from someone's hand in front of them. Reason being that it's not as simple as it would seem. Instead of holding it in front of them like that, they would drop their pants, stick the matches up their bum, and turn and face you. So instead of taking it from the hand, you'd be taking it from someone's bum. And instead of reaching the next level of the gang, you would be assigned the rank of something like the unclean. That would be your status. You were one of the unclean, and the other gang members would be allowed to beat you up. They would be allowed to steal your things. What would happen if you chose the more dangerous option of jumping from the top of the bunk bed? Well, of course, it's not as dangerous as it would seem. You'd put on the blindfold, you'd climb to the top of the bunk bed, and when you dive off, they would have placed some mattresses on the floor that you would land on, and you would be through to the next stage of the initiation test. There was one case in the book where somebody jumped off the top of the bunk bed too quickly. They did it before the mattresses were in place. They got injured. They went to the hospital because they kept their mouth shut and didn't complain to the doctors or nurses or the security guards about what had happened. They quickly were put through to the end of the initiation stage, and they were a fully fledged gang member. I would have loved it if they had some element like that as part of these choices. I feel like a more interesting way of staging a prison game would be out there. Some game where you arrive in prison and you have to work your way to a position of safety or work your way to a position amongst the gang members. I think that would be quite interesting. I know there are a lot of prison influencers on YouTube, so maybe they could come out with something that would be realistic and fun to play. Thank you for watching this review of Incognito. I'd love to hear your opinion of this game if you've played it. If you were able to solve the puzzle relating to the commissary, do leave me a note in the comment and explain it to me in better terms than what's on their hint page. I love you for that. If you have a favorite prison movie or prison book that you'd like to recommend, I'm certainly in the mood for a good book recommendation. There's only one more game available in the Masters of Crime series that I haven't played. It's called Rapture. I'll probably be playing that soon. There's a good chance that the next video I put up will be a summary of the whole Masters of Crime series. I'll try to tell you which one is going to be most interesting for you. However, I only need to play one more Detective and I'll have played the lot. If that one arrives before Rapture, the next video might be a look at the Detective series.